Neale, Peadar and Kevin are all still with me now. Threats of political violence or violence directed at politicians and people involved in politics and policy making has obviously been in the agenda or on the agenda and in the news headlines here in the context of Simon Harris, the Tánaiste in recent days. And it's something we're going to come back to in a moment, but it's difficult to introduce that conversation without acknowledging what happened in Utah in the United States tonight. Kevin, for the uninitiated out there who don't know of Charlie Kirk and are seeing these notifications flashing up on their phones that this right-wing activist, this MAGA activist has been killed on the university campus grounds, what can you tell us about it?
Well, I think most people know that there's this kind of subculture of kind of media personalities now in America, and they generally align with either the Trump regime or the anti-Trump regime. He is very much defined by the Trump regime. He would consider himself a friend of Trump. And in some ways, he was kind of Trump's spokesperson to young people. So he's in his early 30s, but actually for the last decade or more, he has really been campaigning very much on that kind of MAGA platform. Very pro-guns, very much sits in with Trump's, has appeared various times on stage with Trump, has a big platform, toured universities like what he was at today. So this is going to be huge. So while people here may not have heard of him in any real great way, this is, in Trump land, this is going to be huge, and it'll be very interesting to see what Donald Trump does now, because this is already being compared to the shooting of Trump himself during the election campaign. But obviously, in this case, Charlie Kirk has died. Yeah,
he has. Donald Trump was the one who announced actually his death. He took to Truth Social and said, "The great and even legendary Charlie Kirk is dead. No one understood or had the heart of the youth in the United States of America better than Charlie. He was loved and admired by all, especially me. And now he's no longer with us. Melania, and my sympathies go out to his beautiful wife, Erica, and family. Charlie, we love you." Lots of people as well, Kevin, they might have been introduced to him on social media over the last couple of years. He would do this thing, and we mentioned Utah, the university grounds he was killed on today. He would go to universities and college campuses in the UK as well, and he'd challenge people he would describe as kind of the liberal left, the elites, the woke.
Feeds off that
argue with them.
Preaches the politics of common sense, but obviously it's a very particular type of common sense. And yes, anti-woke would be... it's, to be honest, like he fits into everything that Trump encapsulates. He'd be a regular on Fox News as one of their panelists, one of their guests, talking about the White House, the administration, what's going on. They're hugely critical of the Democratic politicians. And yeah, I think his value to Trump was his ability to connect with young people, because Donald Trump is it fair to call him an elderly man? I think it probably is. He's a billionaire. There are many reasons why Donald Trump shouldn't connect with young people, with students in particular. And yet he had people like Charlie who were able to do that for him.
John McGurk, who's of Gripped Media and a regular guest on this show, relatively regular, tweeted as well, "There's a generation of young right-wingers in much of the English-speaking world who've just witnessed one of their finest and most important intellectual leaders gunned down in cold blood for speaking his mind. It will radicalise them. It should radicalise them," is what John says. Larry Donnelly, who's always insightful on this type of thing, the law lecturer in NUI Maynooth, suspect the killing of Charlie Kirk is a moment in time that's going to prove very consequential in myriad unknowable ways for American politics and more broadly for American society. I mean, it's very hard to say at this point, Neale, whether Larry is right or wrong, but you'd have to be worried, wouldn't you?
No, I think Larry will unfortunately be proved right. Or maybe fortunately proved right, because this is a moment, it's utterly tragic, whatever one thinks of the opinions. But in the last decade, we've seen 2 British members of Parliament killed in their constituency clinics, doing what Peadar and I do every week, helping people. And a decision has to be made. Politics has always been quite coarse, but perhaps we're in the age now where we're 24/7, 100% accessible. When I say we, I mean the collective, not just elected representatives. I mean the media, I mean people who hold public office. And there is a deliberate coarsening, but these actions do have consequences. I would hope, looking at the one side of the coin of Larry's point, that maybe people go, well, maybe we need to step back and say that Peadar and I can go hammer and tongs on any issue, but we probably would sit down and have a cup of coffee together more regular than that and talk about normal things like what we did in our holidays, because we are human beings who are trying to do the same thing just in different ways. I do fear, and I think what Larry's getting at, particularly in the United States, and to pick up John's point, I really don't think people should be radicalised by this, because radicalisation of any sort never goes anywhere good.
Peadar, has there been a coarsening of political debate in this country as well?
There has. There's a kind of nearly a dehumanizing situation happening at the moment where, you can radically oppose somebody's views but still accept them as, a human being just like yourselves with all the same needs and wants and challenges as yourself as well. And what is happening in terms of threats of violence and death threats is completely so anti-democratic. And it's interesting that some people who claim that they're flying the flag for democracy are sometimes behind the fact that they're actually silencing, censoring by their actions other people in relation to this. I was looking back just kind of to see, is this completely different from times past? And, I remember, like, let's say the referendum in 2018 was a very difficult time in terms of social media and abuse. The crash was a very difficult time in terms of abuse. And even the Troubles. So we do have, there has been examples of this before. But I do think this has been made more difficult by social media. Like, algorithms are at a profit, specifically, amplifying these voices, and that's a real problem. I believe strongly in for freedom of speech, but the problem is that only a certain type of speech is actually being amplified, and that's the most corrosive sometimes of speech in relation to that. And the question you started with is, how do we de-escalate this to a certain extent? And the problem is, this shocking murder that's happened in the States, like, violence breeds violence, okay? So how do we de-escalate? Like, there is a section of society right across the English-speaking world at the moment who do feel that their voices are not being heard, who do feel excluded, who do feel that the political establishment is working against their rights, etc. And to a certain extent, I do think that it's necessary to make sure that the problems that they have are voiced by functional Democrats in Parliament.
Is there an element
make sure
of
that they don't feel that the only way
Yeah,
out
but is there an element of
democracy.
they call it, is it the cascading effect? That if authorities, police, for example, turn a blind eye to somebody nipping through an orange light, that there's this cascading effect and there's an actual correlation between that type of behaviour and ultimately somebody kind of going double the speed limit around the M50 and killing somebody. What I'm getting at there is, what I'm trying to compare to is the type of language that politicians and even the media, we should acknowledge as well, use around policy and policymakers, use of words like betrayal and traitors and treason, language that you've used in the past as well, Peadar, about political opponents, that actually that emboldens more kind of vocal hatred online then directed against those people. Peadar's calling them I'm not having a go at you suggesting what you've done has led to what has happened at Simon Harris says, not for a moment, but that it emboldens, somebody sees that and they think Peadar's calling these people traitorous or treasonous, and therefore, I'm going to take that and ramp it up a bit.
But first of all, I have never called anybody traitors or treasonous in my...
Well, you've used the word treason to describe government policy in the past.
I'm not aware that I have actually used that particular word, but I'll take your word for it now, but I'm not aware that I have. But what I will say, that there is a coarseness and a ramping up of coarseness in politics. And actually, at the start of this Dáil, some of the scenes in the Dáil where people were roaring, at the Count Corlea, that was, I think, an overstepping of the mark by the political establishment in terms of this. But at one point I will say, 6 years ago, and some of the stuff that we're seeing in Ireland elsewhere is around the issue of immigration, okay? 6 years ago, I said that as a country, we do need to have a proper conversation around these issues. That if we don't allow for a proper discussion around these issues and we push the conversation underground, the issue doesn't disappear, but it gets harvested by ne'er-do-wells. And I do think that, one of the things of political leadership is to pick up the thorny things at times and have proper discussions around them to make sure that people feel that actually the political establishment are not ignoring them. They're not, calling them, names. They're actually listening to us and they're at least discussing it. And that's one of the beauties of democracy. It is actually a formula to release tensions in society. And I do think that we have been too straitjacketed in the last, especially 5 or 6 years, in not allowing for proper discourse on those real issues that are affecting communities across the country.
Would you accept that, Neale?
No, and I'll be very careful with this because I do want to disagree agreeably. Even using the consistent term political establishment, who are you referring to? You're referring to the democratically elected government who have a majority as per the will of the people. When we talk about discussions being shut down, Do we discuss every topic, or do we discuss the topic in a way that affects people as per what's appearing in our communities? And I think we do have to create more space for that, but we have to be very careful, and that responsibility comes on all of us, in the broadest sense, to really watch our language when we talk about it, and how we use those terms deliberately. And I would argue the over-personalisation of Irish politics. There's been a consistent approach on both sides, by the way. I'm holding my hands up here, and I reflect when I was a senator and I was trying to get quoted by Kevin in his articles and get on your shows. I probably said stuff on social media about people who voted for Brexit that, you know what, was below me. And it's taken me a few times to reflect that. But constantly trying to make this about individuals, as if people in the so-called political establishment don't care. I think of the fact that when I worked in politics first, and Fine Gael were an opposition party, the notion of emotion, no confidence was a rarity. But then we went through a stage that was every 6 months. And it was about Helen McEntee, it was about Pascal Donoghue, it was about Simon Coveney, it was about Leo Varadkar. And it wasn't about the issues. It was always about the person. So I do think...
Do you think that's happened with Simon Harris?
I think there has been a focus on Simon as a person, not necessarily by politicians, I might say, but certainly about people who disagree with him. And look, I spoke to Simon at length. We were at our think-in in Mullingar, and he's an extremely accomplished public representative, but he is a human who's got 2 young kids and a wife at home, and they are under threat, Kieran. And we need to bear that in mind every time we speak. And I certainly think I need to learn a few lessons.
So there can be absolutely no tolerance for what happened to Simon Harris. It's absolutely unforgivable. It's wrong. And the people who are involved should be pursued to the full extent of the law and should have the full strength of the law against them. And actually, the last time I received a threat was actually the last time I was on this particular programme, giving out about the fact that Helen McEntee had received a threat in her home. So there's very few people across the political spectrum who haven't had serious threats made against them. But
would you be more conscious of your public safety than you might have been in the past because of something like that?
I'd be more conscious about where I live, and definitely, because of that threat, for example, that I just mentioned, I made a decision that I'm going to make my house more secure in relation to it. But I just want to say one thing, and it's important that we don't, again, mix up the issue of robust, necessary accountability in a political system, and in some way nearly insulate individuals from that robust accountability by bleeding this conversation into threats of violence, because they're not the same thing. And, I'm a big critic of Simon Harris, and I've stated before that I would
they're not the same thing, sorry. They're not. But I spoke to Noreen O'Sullivan about this during the week, the former Garda Commissioner, and she was making the point that, where those robust political exchanges, for example, even them, where they don't spill over into threats against behaviour, but they do cross over a line in terms of maybe personal insult, that there is that cascading effect, and that emboldens people, that the person we might have described as a lone wolf in the past, because of the algorithm which you cited, they actually now look at that and they consider themselves the pointy end of a very big spear. I'm actually representing loads of people who are really angry with Simon Harris.
There's no excuse for personal insults, but there is an excuse and there is a need for individuals in power to be held to account. There are very serious problems in this country around housing, around healthcare. CHI grabbed the people's attention for the whole summer because of the fact that so many children went for so long without the necessary operations, went into serious situations where one child lost his life. So we do have to have an ability to be able to hold individuals to serious account, and for not to bleed those two different issues into one another, because the danger of that is that then the fact is opposition TDs can't actually hold people to account, and then the general public get more angry, and then you have more stresses within society.
Kevin?
Yeah, I think that the one interesting thing about this, Peadar's just identified that he's had a threat. And if you go through, someone served time for threats that were made to Mary Lou MacDonald. There have been people like Helen McEntee's had to evacuate her children from her house. Michael Carrigy, the Fine Gael senator, has had issues. It crosses all of politics. So there is an anger out there that actually is not that targeted or clever. It's just at politics. And I'm not quite sure what the answer to that is. So it's Simon Harris now. It'll be someone else in a month's time. And that's a bigger problem.
Yeah, it is, which means, unfortunately, we'll be talking about it again. I'm sure we're going to have to leave it there for the moment.